So welcome all. Thank you for gathering at this late hour. So I wanted to just look at a little bit on Hanukkah. This is pretty much an application for our Rav Weinberger Shiur. He was giving Shiur on Kedushas Levi, and he raised a really interesting point. Rav Kook has a very famous letter, where Rav Kook taught in a number of different fashions, but one of the ways in which he taught is he wrote letters. And one of the things that he was addressing was whether the generations fall over time, whether each generation that is descending from Har Sinai, the farther away you get from Har Sinai, are you considered a lower level of holiness, or do we say that with the generations, as things go forward, we actually progress and we increase in holiness? So this is a really interesting question, because when we look at Hanukkah, we knew there are two basic approaches to how we're supposed to light Hanukkah candles. One approach is that we're supposed to light 8 candles one night and then decrease as the nights go on. That's the opinion of Beit Shammai and the Gemara, which would seem to imply that this is like the opinion of Yeridas Adoros, that as time moves on, the light gets less per se. Whereas Beit Hillel is Mosif Aholech. He says that, and the reason is Mailin Bakodesh Vein Maridin. We go up in holiness and we don't go down. That's it. So, and that's rooted in, no, actually, as the generations go on, there is a greater sense of holiness that is coming. So Rav Kook has a letter where he addresses this. But I think before we look at that, given that these have been the Eish Kodesh Chaburas, and we're looking at the thought of Rav Kalman Shapiro and his drashot in the Warsaw Ghetto from the years 1940 to 1943, it's really, this is one of the marquee points of the entire Sefer, where the Pizatzer Rebbe, in addressing something that has altered the course of history, but has also been the story of Jewish history, meaning Jewish suffering is nothing new to the Jewish people. And as the generations go on, they're forced to encounter a tremendous amount of suffering. And the Pizatzer Rebbe has to grapple with the question of, not only is our generation better in holiness than the other generations, or are they worse in holiness than the other generations, but he also has to grapple with what extent is the suffering compared to the other generations. Meaning, we know that the Jewish people have always had a tumultuous past. Is it that the things and the tsaros that we're going through right now are the worst we've ever seen, or is this just another rung in the ladder? And it's fascinating because the Pizatzer Rebbe's Torahs are also psychological analyses, and they're also psychotherapy on himself, in terms of his ability to cope with the situation around him and his faith at large. So I think we're going to, over here, if you look at the first, this is a very famous speech. It's very challenging, but it's very important. So it's the first page from the Eish Kodesh. It's from the Kevan. So this is from 1942. And he says, V'kevan, Shekain sarich gam emuna lihios b'mesiros nefesh, kevan shekol koach ha'mesiros nefesh sheyesh b'Yisrael mimena hi, v'im hamuna lo tiyeh b'mesiros nefesh, ein tipal bo mesiros nefesh. He's encouraging his constituents. He's saying we need to have faith, and that faith needs to be able to manifest itself in giving your life over in service of the divine, in service of the Jewish people. And he says, Ve'inyon mesiros nefesh b'emuna, hi shagam b'das ha'hester yamin bo yisbarach, she'akol mimena yisbarach l'tov v'kol tzedek. He's saying the act of mesiros nefesh is the deep understanding and awakening of this latent feeling that God is ultimately doing everything for good, and that we're readily going along with the divine plan, so as to say, I'm willing to give my life for something that I believe is capital G goodness. And all of the suffering and the tribulations are really filled with God's love for the Jewish people. But he says, but there are those people who have a hard time seeing it this way. Meaning, of course they have a hard time seeing it this way because their mom is dying. But Pizatzer Rebbe is saying the highest level of faith is being able to makabel yisur and ba'ava, and realizing that suffering is really coming from a higher place of love, even if it's not revealed love. But the Pizatzer Rebbe is attacking those who aren't able to reach that level, that incredibly challenging level. And he says they have all these questions on God, and they have all these questions about faith. And he calls them out, he says, Lama azav tanu, why have you abandoned the way of the Lord? It's saying instead of drawing closer to Torah and to avoda in these times of challenges, on the contrary, they've completely forsaken, destroyed, and abandoned the Torah. And he says, this is very charif. These are, also you have to understand, it's not like he's just giving these drashot and writing them in some sequestered corner. These are real people he's talking to, have broken and shattered lives, who are coming to him for strength. And he says, Amuna hi yisod kol. Having faith that God is doing good is the foundation of everything. They say, once you break faith, you've completely abandoned the divine himself. Haneshamos shenidonos bighanam shavos b'tshuva ukshaolos migehanam olos toros mizkekes umakarim anu laHashem shagam otam it yasrim b'yisurim elu yalim Hashem mizkakim krovim elav tamid. And he says pain sometimes is a necessary way of coming close to God, and belief in the process of pain, of faith, is a way that we can cleanse ourselves. And he brings the example of Gehenna. He says sometimes souls have to go to Gehenna to extract a type of cleansing. And this is a very different approach than the Pizatz Rebbe has taken in Pas B'Mar. Famously in Chai Sar, he screams out to God and he says, this is enough. He equates the mashal brought down in Gemara on Brachos on Ham and Aleph, which it says just like a piece of meat, it needs salt in order to sweeten it, and that is equated to pain. Just like salt sweetens meat, so too pain can sweeten the individual and bring out a certain refined nature of them. But the Pizatz Rebbe says, well, what happens if you add too much salt to a piece of meat? It's no longer edible. He says the same thing is with our challenges and with our pains. I can understand that perhaps a little bit of salt can bring out the sweetness, but what happens when we're drowning in Yisurim? We can't even be the people that aren't meant to be. So that's a completely opposite approach to saying we want suffering and we encourage suffering, and if you don't have faith that the suffering is good for you, then you don't have a connection to Hashem. And I'll skip a little bit. And he says, Ube'emes, last paragraph on the bottom right, Ma makom l'kushos chas v'chalilo shelis. He says, what place do we have to even ask? Hein emes sheyisurin kamo elu shanu sovlim ata ba'os. He's saying these Yisurim, these challenges that we've faced, it's just another rung in the ladder of the Jewish experience. And he says, Rak echad l'kama me'os shanim. It comes along once every 200 years or so. Aval mikol makon eich zen nitzar lahavin et masei Hashem alav. He says we can't understand God's ways. Lahavkim chas v'shaliyah k'shalo navin oto. Im gam kelach echad shel osiv she'asa Hashem lo navin. It says even if one blade of grass sprouts, we can't fathom that. And how much more so, mikol shekain shenefesh lo nasi. So we can't even understand the inner workings of the formation of a blade of grass. How much more can we not understand that which is the soul, that which is ephemeral and so much more complex? And he says, even more than that, how about an angel and the celestial being? The kol shekain es malach, the kol shekain es dati yisbarach, and how much more so the divine's mind himself. So if we can't even understand all these intermediate steps between us and God, how can we understand God himself and ask questions on his plan? The Jewish people have suffered so much more than this. Why are we the generation that's ultimately abandoned the Torah? Why aren't we like the people? Why aren't we like Yirmiyahu, the Navi, who's going in the Gemara? This is a very Shiurish thing to do, but the Gemara in Kedushin, Kaf Hayam and Beis, it's in Yirmiyahu, but I only know it from the Gemara. He says that Yirmiyahu's mamish buying plots of field in Yehuda and Shomron as the Jewish people are ready to be destroyed, as he's prophesizing Chorban Bayis. And he's going to the Yehuda and Shomron, and he's buying up plots of land. And people are saying, why are you buying up plots of land? He says, the reason I'm buying up plots of land is because one day the Jewish people are going to come back to these very hills, and they need to have the land. So they're going to come back, and I want the land. And I want to make sure that I have this property. Right now there's a vineyard there. It's unbelievable. Thank God. But that's the type of faith that people had. He's saying, what type of, who are we to question? And we can't possibly understand God. And the bottom of the page on bottom right. Why is this different than any other suffering? Why is it that all the other stories that you learned in the Gemara and in the Medrash about how those people kept their faith and you didn't keep your faith? What happened in Gemara and Avodah Zarah on Yud Zayin Amud Aleph tells the story of Chanina ben Treidon, the martyr, one of the 10 martyrs who gives his life al Kiddush Hashem. The famous story where his executioner wraps him in wool among his vital organs to make him suffer, so that his execution has to be prolonged until eventually the executioner says, if I take your garments off you, will there be a spot reserved in me for heaven? Chanina ben Treidon says, of course there'll be, and he jumps into the fire with him and dies al Kiddush Hashem. Why can't we be like Chanina ben Treidon? Rabbi Chanina ben Treidon, excuse me. And he says, Ki elu anashim she'omrim she'isurim kamo elu od lo hayu Yisrael toim heim. He's saying there are going to be some people who claim that these Yisurim, these challenges, have never been like they are right now. But he says, what are you talking about? The Chorban Beis HaMikdash Beitar? What about the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash? What about the massacre in Beitar where Jewish bodies were chopped up into pieces? Hayu kamo elu. What, you're going to say that's not like these? So this is the Maimer until 1942. Then he says, Hashem Yirachem v'yomer dai l'tzareinu v'yoshienu tikef miyad mi'atavad olam. Amen. He says Hashem should have mercy on us, and he should put an end to our suffering, and he should save us immediately for now and forevermore. This is 1942. The Pizatz Rebbe comes back to this writing in 1943. You guys see there's a footnote over here, 4 lines down on the top left. He says, Kamo Elu, there's a little 1. This is one of the most famous pieces. And he actually amends it in 1943. And he comes back and he says Haggah, meaning a note. Rak hatzarot shahayu ad shalhei dishnat tavshin beis hayukvar. He's saying everything that I just said, I'm bracketing off till the year of 1942. Meaning the fact that I claim that the Jewish suffering and the Jewish condition is just another rung in the ladder and it's not worse than anything Jewish people have ever experienced is only until the year 1942. He says, Aval keshat saros mishunos. He says, once these saros changed, umitos raos mishunos, and the vile ways in which our enemies, amach shemam, have been executing us, obviously referring to the gas chambers, shechadshu harisham harotzchim hamishunim aleinu beis Yisrael, that the way that the evildoers and the enemies of Israel had renewed the ways in which they killed the house of Israel. Meshahale Tafshin Beis, what happened up until 1942, Lefiya Dati B'divrei Chazal. That only was until then. And he says, now I can understood the mimer of Chazal, which says in B'divrei Yamim, Asher li Yisrael b'chlal lo haya kamosam. He says, now I can understand how Chazal talk about suffering, and I can state that the Jewish people have never seen suffering like this. Lo hayu kamosam, it's never been like this before for our people. This is by far the worst. He says, Hashem yirachem aleinu. Hashem should have mercy on us. V'yatzilenu miyadim keheref ayin. He says, Hashem should have mercy on us, as he does with the blink of an eye. V'yom v'asek yudchet kislev tavshin gimel. This is yudchet kislev. What's the date today? The date is 21st. So this is 3 days ago in 1943, right before Hanukkah. The whole inyan of Hanukkah is being able to fight light in the darkest of places. It's being able to fight against all odds. It's the Risham who rarely come to destroy you and still having the koach to light the menorah and to rededicate your temple. So this is obviously a very challenging piece where the Piaseczner Rebbe basically admits that this is the worst thing the Jewish people have ever seen. And his entire perspective, his entire charifus, his musar to his community just completely melts away. And he says this no longer applies. I was 100% wrong and we can't fathom anything like this. So I think with this, we can look at the Rav Kook letter and we can still try to understand what happens as the generations go on. The Piaseczner Rebbe seems to say that the generations get more challenging, and there's more pain as time goes on, as explicated by the Holocaust. So this is from the Sefer Talei Chaim, Rav Chaim HaKohen Shlita. He lives in Israel, and he's actually very sick. He should have a refuah shalema. Amen. Amen. He's a big Mekubal. He actually doesn't have a beard. He works in Tel Aviv. He's called the Chalban, which means the milkman. He works in the back of Milcheves Deshen, which is under a questionary hashgacha. He's one of the biggest Mekubalim in all of Israel, and his cheese shop in Tel Aviv, some people don't eat there. Crazy. But he's really just a quote-unquote normal person. He's a tremendous Talmud Chacham. He gives Shiur, and so he writes these svarim called Talei Chaim, where he really explains things according to the inner workings of Torah. So here he says, Yerida sa'olam b'chitzonis v'halo sa'olam b'pnimis. And I don't know if we're going to do the whole thing inside. And he says, V'hine Yodeh Hadavar, the second paragraph. Does everyone have it over here? Yerida sa'olam. So it's the second paragraph. And he wants to say, like, what's going on? Are we going down in the generations, or are we increasing in holiness as the generations go on? He says, He says that the world goes on and proceeds every second. As each second goes along, it arrives towards completion. And he says, it's continuing to rise level after level. As each generation goes on, the Torah gets stronger. On an inner level, the souls that are continuing to be refined. We'll explain what that means. And he quotes from the Ramchal. The Ramchal is also an enormous Mekober of Rav Moshe Chaim Lozado, I believe from Italy, I could be wrong, author of the Derech Hashem, but also a bunch of other Svarim al Pi Kaballah. And we don't have to read it inside, but basically the Ramchal explains that as every single day goes on, the world moves closer and closer towards its completion, towards a fulfilled state, seeming to imply that as the generations go on, the people get holier. It would seem to be the opinion of Beis Hillel, Mosiv v'holech. We add candles as the days go on. And top left, he says, Rom anu midivrei Ramchal. We see from the Ramchal, et halichi talut shel olam, the process of the elevation of the world. V'chein hadavar mafia b'svarim rabim pnimis Torah, and this idea is explicit in many of the books that explain pnimis Torah. V'hu even sod pnimis, and this is a foundational aspect of the inner workings of Torah. V'sod avoda habirum v'tikun olam, and he's saying that that's what it means to bring the world, the takin It's the goal of Judaism. One of the goals is that we're actually here to fix the world for the legion of God. Now, who God is another conversation, but it's supposedly to fix the world for a supposed good. And that seems that with time we're able to accomplish that goal. As each day goes forth, we're able to accomplish that. And he says, every day it seems to arrive at this wholeness. But we have a completely contradicting opinion in the Gemara, which says, Matsinu davar hafach, the opposite thing. We have this idea of Yeridas Adoros that I'm sure we've all heard of. Asher Amru Chazal, but what do we make of the Maimer Chazal, where they says, Im Rishayim Kimalachim Anu Kechomrim, meaning that if Im Rishonim Kimalachim Anu Kechomrim, Gemara in Shabbos says, if the first people were like angels, we're like donkeys, seeming to imply that as the generations go on, we're lowering in holiness. That explicitly contradicts the Ramchal, who says that every single day the world moves towards Shleimus. Every single day, the world moves towards a greater aspect of holiness as time goes on. Seems to be not Yeridas Adoros, Aliyas Adoros. And he says, "Ubo nischazek tova lavotenu shel malahen lo chatu anu kamo shelo banu olam." Meaning, if our forefathers were as if they've never sinned, anu kimi shelo banu olam. Whereas people who never even entered into the world. I think it's meaning like we don't have a chance of being in this world because they were in the world and they didn't sin, and we're in the world and we don't even have a chance. How's there a day where your curse is not increased more than your friend? It's an obvious question. What's pshat? So Rav Kook comes to settle this dispute. And Rav Kook, we're not going to do the whole thing inside, but he says an unbelievable teaching, and it's underlined, and he says it outside. If you see the underlined portion, Uba Emet. Ha'olam kulo b'chol dorotov hi mikasha echad mamish. It's made out of miksha echad. We learn from the menorah. The commandment is to make it out of miksha echad, one block. He's saying that the world is made up of one block completely. And umamela bevade shekola olam nasem mevugar yoter kach mitarbuto bo puelas atova shekola doros klum. He says an amazing point. He says, as time goes on, we don't view generations as generations of the past and generations of the future. Rather, the authentic Jewish perspective of understanding our collective identity is one organism called Knesset Yisrael. And the way that the Mekubalim, and according to Pnimus HaTorah, understand the way that we self-define, is that really there's just one soul. And that one soul is called Knesset Yisrael, the Legion of Israel in Kaballah. In Kabbalah, it's also referred to as Malchus. It's also referred to as Shechina. It's the immanent aspect of God represented and carried out by the Jewish people. The Jewish people are the missionaries of the divine on earth. They are the aspect of the divine which is immanently in this world. There's one soul called the Jewish people. Of that soul, it is broken down to 600,000 composite root souls, corresponding to the 600,000 letters in the Torah, corresponding to the 600,000 men that left Eretz Mitzrayim. Obvious question, what about the women? The women are alluded to on the black fire, meaning there's this idea of white fire and black fire in Torah. On the parchment, we have the explicit lettering in the black, but we also have the space between the lettering. And that's kind of, in a way, that's a place that's higher than writing. Meaning there are things that can be captured in writing, but there are things that can't be captured in writing. They exist beyond the realm of writing. Like things sometimes exist beyond the realm of speech, like thought. And that would be where the women are alluded to. So these 600,000 root souls all come from one organism, and they're all moving towards completion. That's where the idea of Gilgulim come in. Meaning if someone has a stint in their life, we don't believe that we have souls, we believe that we are souls. And we play characters, meaning I am a soul in a character, just like an actor plays a character. The character is not who I am, rather it's not the essence of my being, I'm me. I'm Simon. Simon is playing a character. The character that I'm playing is the person that I look like. So too, right now I'm a soul and I'm playing Simon. That's the role that I've been dealt, and I have to arrive at a sense of completion. Perhaps this is the fourth body or the fourth character that I've been in because the first three characters didn't get it done. So as we can see, as time moves on, the generations move towards a sense of completion. So what Rav Kook is teaching us is that as time goes on, we're arriving at a sense of completion. So we can say that there's Aliyah Sadoros, but there's also Yerida Sadoros, meaning the Jewish soul has to complete itself. And it's possible, as he says over here, that there were tremendous giants who were Jews who did way more of completion than we did. Meaning Moshe Rabbeinu could have moved the bar in Jewish completion from 0% to 80%. He could have completed the Jewish soul by a tremendous amount, where we only moved the margin by 0.1%. And the way Rav Davidel understands this is, for example, he gives the story. And he says, when he was in class, he was in 5th grade, and his Rebbe used to give out candies to anyone who answered a good question. Kidding, marbles. And anytime there was a good question, the Rebbe would take a marble out and dump it into the cup. And this went on. And as the deal was, whoever gets to put the marble in and it tips over, there are cherry sours for everyone. So Rav David would always say that when it was this high, it wasn't so exciting. But when it got to the top, you could be the worst guy in the class. And if you get the answer right, you're getting cherry sours for everyone. So he says that's pshat in this teaching right here, meaning Moshe Rabbeinu could have got the jar up to here. So in that sense, everything since Moshe Rabbeinu is Yeridas Adoros. The generations are going down. We're losing in holiness. We didn't fill up the cup as much as Moshe Rabbeinu did. But what happens if we view our collective identity as one soul? Meaning, great, the soul is more towards completion. And when Moshe Rabbeinu came into the world, it was at 80%. And when Simon Kofman's in the world, it's at 99%. And I could be the kid sleeping in the back of the room who perks his head up, gets an answer right, and there's cherry sours for everyone. So that's what Rav Kook is saying. That's what it means right now in Yeridas Adoros versus Aliyas Adoros. He says, Mitzad Chitzainis, from an external perspective, of course I'm not the same as Moshe Rabbeinu. You're not the same as Sarei Menu. None of us are. There are giants out there. He says it over here. He says, V'shel Moshe Rabbeinu, v'shel Nevi'im HaKadoshim, v'shel Tznanim v'Imarim, v'Rebbe Akiva, v'Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai, v'shel Kedushei Elyon, sheb'chol Doros, Harambam, Harashba, Miran HaBeis Yosef, the Rizal, Rav Chaim Vitala, Ramchal, Baal Shem Tov, Harshash, Cham Sofer, Rebbe Akiva Eger, Rav Nachman, Rav Kook, Haben Ish Chai. He says these are giants. But at the same time, they didn't inherit the glass the way we inherited the glass. And Rav Kook is teaching that although there are Yeridas Adoros, although from an external perspective I'm not Rav Kook, I inherited a position where the glass is completely full. And I have the ability to bring the soul of Israel towards its completion, and so do you. And if we get an answer right, there'll be cherry sours forever. There'll be Mashiach. And these are the two completely contradicting opinions in the Gemara, Beit Shammai and Beis Hillel. Beit Shammai says Yeridas Adoros. As the generations go on, the Jews get worse. They move farther away from completion. He's talking about Mitzad Chitzainis. But who do we paskin by? Ultimately paskin by Beis Hillel. And Beis Hillel says, even though Mitzad Chitzonis we're not Moshe Rabbeinu, and we're not Rivka Imenu, at the end of the day, we inherited a position where we're at the end of time, and we're the generation of the Gvita de Mashiach, the footsteps before Mashiach, which the Gemara talks about how many different things will be different, and we were not those people, but at the same time, we have the ability to tip the jar of marbles. We get an answer right, and there are cherry sours for everyone. And we paskin like Beis Hillel, we say most of V'holech. As the generations go on, it's true that they have a harder time with Torah and mitzvos, but they have a greater ability to impact the Jewish collective identity and nationhood. It's an unbelievable thing. So with that in mind, I want to look at one more story which really captures this. And we talked about the immense sorrows that happened at the end of time, and the challenges that Pizatz and Rebbe had to face that he said were like no other generations of past. And we talked about how Rav Kook explained to us, I don't want to do it inside, how there's this idea of Yeridas Adoros, but there's also this idea of Aliyas Adoros. And we're in a generation that's so broken, but at the same time, we're in such a unique position to bring Mashiach. We're right here. And even though we're not worthy of doing it, we've inherited a situation where we need a call to action. And despite these challenges, the Jewish people, even though they weren't Moshe, they were able to step up. So I want to read this story. This is such a powerful story. It's from Rav Yafa Eliach's book. It's called Hasidic Tales of the Holocaust. I've definitely said it before. Have you read it?
Yeah.
Very powerful. Anyone have questions on the Rav Kook Ramchal split? Anyone good? No? Seriously, perk up. Yeah? No? Okay, very good. So, this is very powerful. And with this in mind, I also, before we tell this story, when I was, last year in Shana Bet, I went to Rav David, Elishav Refuah Shalema, Amen. So he did a Farbrengen in his house for Zot Chanukah, the 8th day of Chanukah. And there was a man there who was born in a DP camp after World War II. And he told the story of how his dad was in Bergen-Belsen with the Blues of a Rebbe, and how the Blues of a Rebbe lit Hanukkah candles in Bergen-Belsen, which is this story. So I went up to her after. I said, I learned that story yesterday, and he gave me some details. And it's just to recognize that these stories aren't just like fairy tales. Like, they're actually people who went through this, and he was real. I met him, and he's a tremendous individual. So the story goes as follows. In Bergen-Belsen, on the eve of Hanukkah, a selection took place. Early in the morning, 3 German commandos meticulously dressed in their festive black uniforms and in visibly high spirits entered the men's barracks. They ordered the men to stand at the foot in their 3-tier bunk beds. The selection had begun. No passports were required, no papers were checked, there was no roll call and no head count. One of the three commanders just lifted his index finger in his snow-white glove and pointed in the direction of a pale face, while his mouth pronounced the death sentence with one single word: come. Like a barrage of machine gun fire from the German commands, come, 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 come. The men selected were marched outside, SS men with rubber trenches and iron prods awaiting them. They kicked, beat, and tortured the innocent victims. When the tortured body no longer responded, the revolver was used. So the individual that I met said this, and he said that before they lit candles, there was mamish a mass murder, where the Nazis walked in and just picked people out and gunned them down. And he said, you can't understand, he was saying to me, you couldn't understand, you can't possibly understand the environment, the morale that these people had. They literally just experienced genocide, really. So like the random selection went on inside the barracks, and the brutal massacre continued outside of the barracks until sundown. When the Nazi black angels of death departed, they left behind heaps of hundreds of tortured and twisted bodies. Then Hanukkah came to Bergen-Belsen. It was time to kindle the Hanukkah lights. A jug of oil was not to be found, no candle was in sight, and a Chanukiah menorah belonged to the distant past. Instead, a wooden clog, the shoe of one of the inmates, became a Chanukiah. Strings pulled from a concentration camp uniform a wick, and the black camp shoe polished pure oil. Not far from the heaps of the bodies, living skeletons assembled to participate in the kindling Hanukkah lights. The Rabbi of Bluza of Israel's Shvirah lit the first candle and chanted the first two blessings in his pleasant voice, and the festive melody was filled with sorrow and pain. When he was about to recite the third blessing, he stopped, turned his head, and looked around as if he were searching for something. But immediately he turned his face back to the quivering small lights, and in a strong, reassuring, comforting voice chanted the third blessing: Blessed art thou, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who has kept us alive, who has preserved us, who has enabled us to reach the season. Among those present at the kindling of the lights was a Mr. Kamenowski, one of the leaders of the Warsaw Band. He was a clever, sincere person with a passion for discussing matters of religion, faith, and truth. Even here in camp at Bergen-Belsen, his passion for discussion did not abate. He never missed an opportunity to engage in such a conversation. As soon as the Rabbi of Bluzov had finished the ceremony of kindling the lights, Zemikowski elbowed his way to the rabbi and said, Shvirah, you are a clever and honest person. I can understand your need to light Hanukkah candles in these wretched times. I can even understand the historical note of the second blessing, who did miracles for our fathers in days of old at this season. But the fact that you recited the third blessing is beyond me. How could you thank God and say, Blessed art thou, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who has kept us alive, who has preserved us, and who has enabled us to reach the season? How could you say it when hundreds of dead Jewish bodies are literally lying within the shadows of the Hanukkah lights? When thousands of Jewish skeletons are walking around in camp, and millions more are being massacred? For this you're thankful to God? For this you praise the Lord? For this you call keeping us alive? Zemikowski, you are 100% right, answered the rabbi. When I reached the third blessing, I also hesitated and asked myself, what should I do with this blessing? I turned my head in order to ask the rabbi of Zanair and other distinguished rabbis who were standing near me, if indeed I may recite the blessing. But just as I was turning my head, I noticed that behind me a throng was standing, a large crowd of living Jews, their faces expressing faith, devotion, and concentration, as they were listening to the rite of the kindling of the Hanukkah lights. I said to myself, if God blessed be He has such a nation that at times like these, when during the lighting of the Hanukkah candles they see in front of them the heaps of bodies of their beloved fathers, brothers, and sons, and death is looking from every corner, if despite all that they stand in throngs, old at this, and with devotion listening to the Hanukkah blessings, who did miracles for our fathers in days of old at this season, if indeed I was blessed to see such a people with so much faith and fervor, then I am under a special obligation to recite the third blessing. It's an incredible story, and the depth of it is something that we have to think about and try to process. But what we can take from this is that it's true that we're not Moshe Rabbeinu. And it's true that, like the Pizatzer Rebbe said, we had to face sorrows that no one else had to face. But at the same time, Mika Amcha Yisrael Goyachad Baretz, Hashem, who's like your people? Who is like the generation at the end of time that can tip the marbles and leave cherry sours for everyone? Who can light Hanukkah candles in concentration camps? Perhaps these people, Rav Weinberger said this at the Pittsburgh shooting. He said a lot of people are saying that this happened because they weren't religious Jews. Rav Weinberger is saying the people in the gas chamber weren't religious Jews. Most of them didn't even know how to speak or read Hebrew. But the only thing that mattered is that they were Jews. These are the people we're talking about. These are the people lighting the Hanukkah candles. This isn't the Rambam, this isn't the Rashba, this isn't Rav Chaim Vital. These are ordinary Jews like me and you. But they're people who, under extraordinary circumstances, were able to get their priorities right and live for something that mattered to them the most. And perhaps we can take chizik from this. And at the time of Hanukkah, Hanukkah was the last mitzvah given to the Jewish people before Galut. And the Rambam famously on Hanukkah says, what was the miracle of Hanukkah? It's not that the Jewish people won the war, and it's not that the Jewish people were able to rededicate the temple. Rather, it was the fact that the Jewish people returned sovereignty under a corrupt Kohanic government for 200 years. He says that's the miracle of Hanukkah. That Eretz Yisrael returned to Jewish sovereignty for 200 years, even though it fell after and the government was, the Kohanim were corrupt and tyrannical. And now we live in a generation where we're the first generation of redemption and last generation from exile. We're Gvited the Mashiach. We're the generation that's going to bring Mashiach. We're the generation that's the most broken. But at the end of the day, we have to understand where we find ourselves in history. And if anyone thinks that my voda doesn't make a difference, it's not true. Because as Rav Kook explains, we paskin most of Aholich. We paskin like Beis Hillel. We paskin that as the days go on, we add more light. And we should really be zocha to merit this. And hopefully we could be the kids at the back of the class who somehow get an answer right and tip the jar of marbles for all of us, granting us all cherry sours. And we should be zocha to fill the light of the menorah and rededicate the menorah of the Beis HaMikdash with Gula Shleim Amitis from Herva Menu. Amen.
Amen.